Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. I'm Trevor Sikkema, Dalton Wasserman here with me. As if you guys didn't get enough of us yesterday for the nearly full review show that we did for every other game in Week 17, we're here to recap Monday Night Football here for you guys. Detroit Lions, the San Francisco 49ers. We're going to talk about everything that went on in this game, what it means really moving forward. A lot of it's going to be for the Lions, but we're going to talk about some specific things that were both good and bad with what we saw with the Niners as well. Dalton, how you doing, my friend?
Fantastic. Look, another week, another Lions shootout. I think, we're getting used to it at this point, but at the very least, it's entertaining, isn't it?
It is it's extremely entertaining. And I think that's where we're going to begin here as we talk about this game and there's just some concerns about the Lions with who's in the lineup, but more importantly, who's not in the lineup. Do they still have the roster that is NFC Championship game caliber, number one overall seed in the NFC caliber, Super Bowl caliber? We're going to dig into all that as we get into the PFF grades for this one as well. So just like we did with the grades release and the review show, let's start there. Let's look at the top 5 graded players here for each team in this game. We're first looking at the Detroit Lions because they won the game and they get the honors at the very top. Running back Jahmyr Gibbs. No David Montgomery, but man, Jahmyr Gibbs has really stepped up over the last couple of weeks. It's not a Sonic and Knuckles combination, but looks like Jahmyr Gibbs can really be a back that they can lean on throughout the entire course of the playoffs, however far it takes them. 86.7 overall grade in this past game. Cornerback could be Robertson with an 82.1. Tight end Sam Laporta, 79.8. Guard Graham Glasnow with a 78.8. And then wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown with a 78.8. Jared Goff led all Detroit Lion players in grades with an 87.8. On San Francisco's side of things, tight end George Kittle, a 93.0. What an insane year George Kittle has been having. There's been some great tight end performances. Obviously, George Kittle is right up there, but you talk about Brock Bowers, you talk about Trey McBride. These guys have been unbelievable this year, but man, Kittle's grades are at the very top in so many categories. This game absolutely helped continue that. Edge rusher Nick Bosa was next with an 88.9. Wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, 78.4. Offensive tackle Colton McKivitz with a 71.1. Running back Isaac Guerrero back, getting a 71.0 himself. And then Brock Purdy. Pretty good game from Brock Purdy. I know we're going to talk about some of the low lights here, but honestly, especially right out of the gate with those 3 touchdowns on those first 3 possessions, pretty good from Brock Purdy. He had an 80.2 overall grade. Just like we do for the review show, we do on Mondays. Dalton, what's your stat that told the story here from Monday Night Football?
As far as who won and lost this football game, it's really the 2 interceptions that Brock Purdy threw to Kirby Joseph, right? Because the Niners all night were going punch for punch with this elite Lions offense, and neither defense was getting any stops. And the only difference for the 49ers was the fact that Purdy threw these 2 interceptions, both in one-score games, one with them leading, the other with them trailing by 6 points. And also the Jake Moody 2 missed field goals. Those were big when you talk about a 6-point game, and also a missed extra point at the end, a 6-point game, and the 7 points were left on the board by Moody. So those 2 factors were really the biggest problem for the 49ers. And when you're playing this Lions offense, even with their defense in the current state that it's in, you don't have a whole lot of room for error offensively because you're going to get into shootout. The Lions at this point, we know with St. Brown, with Jameson Williams, with Jahmyr Gibbs, Jared Goff, the offensive line, Laporta, everything they have, they're going to score 30 points on just about anybody they play, and you have to be able to play at that level for the vast majority of a football game, right? And you're talking about the Lions, look, 8.2 yards, the 49ers, I should say, 8.2 yards per play on the night. It's just insane for the whole night. It was their 3rd highest EPA per play of the season. The Niners played a terrific offensive game. Obviously, they scored 34 points, but those 2 turnovers against the Lions not having any, that was really the difference in the ball game. You just have so little margin for error when it feels like the Lions are just unstoppable offensively.
Yeah, and I think that my stat that told the story is really just how much offensive success we have for the Detroit Lions, because a lot of people talk about, man, they've lost so much on defense, right? There's so many defensive players, obviously Aiden Hutchinson, a lot of other guys on the defensive line, really the front 7, because you go to the linebacker level, they're pretty decimated there with their linebackers as well. And you just say, oh, man, is it too much for this team? I mean, we're watching the game last night. It's 3 consecutive touchdowns for the San Francisco 49ers to open up the game. And you just go, man, is it just, are we going to look back at this Detroit Lions season and think, what if? And obviously that is still something that could happen for this team. Obviously, if they don't win the Super Bowl with as beat up as they are, we're going to inevitably call them a what-if team. But they were still able to score 40 and win this game. They were still able to say, well, it doesn't matter that the Niners are continuing to, throw haymakers as this game has begun. They dropped 40. And I think that to me is the stat that told the story for this team is that when you look at their season overall for the 2024 year, they have the most points per game at 33.3. That is their average. They are averaging 38.7 in their last three. Like they have taken this up another notch, scoring more than 5 points per game than they already have as a league leading average to try to compensate for that defense. And so I think when we talk about the Lions and we say, man, all right, the defense isn't as good as it would be when it's fully healthy, the offense is somehow only getting better. Even without a David Montgomery, they're putting up 40. They're putting up 38. It's just it's crazy averages from this team. And just when you want to go, man, I feel bad for the Lions in a sense where you're kind of counting them out, you can't. And I think that their whole offense was really what stood out last night. Now, Jared Goff on 3rd and 4th down, I also want to give a shout out to because I thought he played great in those situations. He was 8 for 12 passing. He had over 100 yards. He had a big time throw. He had 3 of his touchdowns came on 3rd and 4th down. And so again, that just goes to the confidence of what this team is playing with and how they are operating. And you listen to Dan Campbell, Dalton, we talk about this all the time. Teams will take the identity of their head coach. Dan Campbell understands that they're kind of down on their luck this year. For as good as this team is and how sort of, I don't know, when I say lucky, I think that people think that means that they didn't work to get where they're at. They're lucky to sort of be able to assemble the team the way that they have. They're lucky that Ben Johnson has said no to a bunch of head coaching jobs over the last couple of years. Like there are things that go into that. But Dan Campbell is not going to let anybody feel sorry for this team. Every single week, it's the same thing. We don't care. Of course, we wish those guys were out there, but we don't care, and we're not going to let that. We're not going to feel sorry for ourselves as we have a early playoff exit or not getting to the Super Bowl, whatever it is. And I think this was another game, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, where they said, whatever we need to do as a team to get to where we want to go, that's what we're going to do. And their success on 3rd and 4th down in particular, hammering their foot on the gas pedal, despite the Niners coming out of the gate very, very hot, was just another sign of they're not going to sit here and go, oh, woe is me. Look at the injuries we went through. What a bummer that this year could have been better for us. They're not going to say that until they absolutely have to, after whenever their loss is going to be in the playoffs, if they have a loss in the playoffs. So to me, the stat that told the story is just continuing to be an offensive juggernaut. And then specifically, you look at that success rate on 3rd and 4th down from Jared Goff, and it's going to be really hard to knock this team out, regardless of who's on their defense, if Jared Goff is playing like that.
Absolutely. They're going to be a tough out. I mean, and we're going to continue to talk about their defense every single week. But offensively, when you're playing like that, look, I think where we're at with this now is I look at this team very much the same as I look at the Buffalo Bills. Can they win the whole thing? Absolutely. If their offense plays like that every single week in the postseason. But that's the hard part is getting to the point where you're doing that now against postseason teams as well. And we've seen him do it this year to postseason teams, but doing it in that high-pressure environment. And that's why next week's game is so important against Minnesota. If you can get home field, first of all, the bye week, and you can cut out one of those games, and 2, you're playing at home, right? As opposed to going to Philadelphia, going to Minnesota, going to even wherever they're going in the first round. I think that's the part. Next week's game is so paramount for both of those teams. And if Minnesota, same thing, if they want to make the Super Bowl, cutting out a game and playing the rest of the games in Minnesota, that's really going to help your odds. We've seen that for years and years where the bye week and all the home games help you in the playoffs more than they hurt you, right? So, look, I think the Lions, can their offense carry them all the way? It sure can. It's just not going to be easy when you make so few stops and you're relying now on so few stars like at safety or Zadarius Smith off the edge that they have to carry an entire defense because there's so many holes on it.
I think the NFL, now I'm obviously being a little tongue-in-cheek when I say that, like the NFL wants the Detroit Lions to make the Super Bowl because like you just said, if they do that, every game they will win will not be a blowout. Like it will be games like we saw last night where, okay, Detroit might come away victorious in the end because they just straight up outscore them. But you look at the Niners, they scored 34 points. Like that was still an exhilarating, high scoring game down to the end. So for entertainment value, I think the NFL would want the Detroit Lions to make the Super Bowl as well. I want to have some high level discussions on where both of these teams are, I think, moving forward. But let's do most impressive and most disappointing. And then I want to get into that for both sort of the Brock Purdy narrative and then a little bit of what you talked about there, the preview of the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings next week. But let's do most impressive and most disappointing. Who are your two guys in this game?
So most impressive for me, I'm actually going to stick with kind of the rookie theme that we had yesterday. And another first-round guy that emerged with his best game of the season was Ricky Pearsall for the 49ers. Look, 8 catches.
Slick Rick, baby.
Another one, another Gator great, right? You're always talking about those. But 8 catches, 141 yards, touchdown, 81.6 receiving grade. And I think what you saw from Pearsall is all of the route running chops, right? And I think it's taken him a while, obviously, to get in a rhythm. The scary preseason incident that happened back then, and he had to recover from that and get in a groove here, as a rookie. But I thought this is what you want to see from the 49ers, obviously, or any team when you're knocked out of the playoffs, is guys like Pearsall, young players who continue to develop with these reps, right? And you get yourself going into next season feeling like, okay, that's a contributor. That guy's going to be a solid player. And Pearsall, obviously they expected that with him being a first-round pick and everything that's happened this year. But if you get this, this game and then next week, a game like this out of him and you feel like, okay, that first-round pick was warranted, not only does that make Pearsall a big piece of their offense moving forward, but it could also foreshadow some moves, let's say maybe with a Deebo Samuel. When you think about, you have Juwan Jennings, you have Ricky Pearsall, you have Brandon Ayuk coming back from injury. Obviously, you have Kittle, but the Brock Purdy contract situation is coming, like you mentioned, and there are going to be players who get shed because they have to fit a huge contract, a huge quarterback contract on there. And I have to wonder if Pearsall's going to emerge down the stretch here, if Deebo Samuel is that guy that gets left off at that point. I know Deebo's an extremely valuable piece and does so many things after the catch, but he hasn't had his best year this year, and Brandon Ayuk really became the number one wide receiver. I think Juwan Jennings really became the number 2 wide receiver on this team, especially as a route runner and his ability to beat man coverage. If Pearsall becomes another guy in that vein, I think Deebo gets to be a little bit more expendable than he was before, knowing that you have all these young weapons on the outside and knowing that you have the big quarterback contract coming.
Yep. I think that is definitely a conversation that I want to get into a little bit more with Brock Purdy, but there's no doubt about it that you draft Ricky Pearsall for that very reason, to give yourself the flexibility. Because like you mentioned, when you drafted him at the time, you hadn't signed Brandon Ayuk's contract. There was talks of like, okay, how much longer is Deebo Samuel going to be here? And it feels as though the most likely path moving forward is them signing Brock Purdy and probably moving on from Deebo Samuel and seeing what they can get from him. But it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, because you'd be locking up a quarterback that hopefully that you feel really great about. And then also you probably get some assets for Deebo Samuel so you can get something back for him while having a first-round pick in Ricky Pearsall, who looked pretty good last night. My most impressive is Kirby Joseph, I think, because it has to be. 2 interceptions last night. I played really, really well. That single high free safety role for him is one that he just plays so well. And you look at the safety rotation, and I'll specifically highlight Brian Branch here. And I know Brian Branch is out of the game for one of them, but I just think from an overall philosophy, using Brian Branch as this hybrid slot defender / box safety type of player. I know Kirby Joseph can be that as well. He can come down and make some tackles for you. There's no doubt about it. But when you have Joseph in sort of that ball hawking role over the middle of the field or just the deep parts of the field, and you truly get to free up Brian Branch to be that chess piece that he can be, that combination of safety work to me is just so impressive with this team. And you look at Joseph's 2 interceptions, both of them came while he was in single high situations, closing the middle of the field. Brock Purdy overthrew a pass to George Kittle on one of them, and he stayed deep. And he was able to read that and stay deep and be in the right spot. Say, okay, well, if he's going to throw this football, either my guy's going to make a play on it over the middle, or he's going to overthrow it and I'm going to go right here for it. Well, it ended up being the latter, and he got that first interception that way. And then the second interception, just that inverted 2 look where he is truly just looking to come down and play whatever crossing route that is going to be. And he picked it off beautifully. It's like Brock Purdy didn't even see him right there. But the instincts that he has in coverage are so paramount for this team, because going back to what we were talking about for the stat that told the story, if the Lions aren't going to be a team that's really going to clamp down on you and limit you to less than 20 points a game, they got to get that extra turnover. But they have to get those players who are going to give them an interception or 2 in a game to give that offense an extra possession, because that's the That's the double benefit. That's the force multiplier, if you will, for turnovers. Is not only are you ending the other team's drive, you are giving your offense an extra possession than it was scheduled to have when the coin toss happened and possession happened at the beginning of the game or overtime or whenever that is. So that all of a sudden, those interceptions, they become less of like, wow, these are great, and they almost become paramount prerequisites for this team to be able to succeed. Without these turnovers, do the Lions win this game? I don't know. They only win by 6, right? There's no telling exactly what would have happened at the end of each of those 49ers drives, but it's a one possession game. It's a touchdown and an extra point. So if they score on one of those touchdowns, maybe this game doesn't even end the way that it is. So putting the emphasis that you need to on those turnovers is really, really important. And I think Kirby Joseph is going to play a massive role for this team reaching their goal of the Super Bowl because he's got to be able to come away with these passes. What about a most disappointing?
No, I think you said it right. I think all year they've had the best pair of safeties in football with Branch and Joseph, and they're both terrific football players. And I think the problem that I have, I guess you could call this most disappointing, but it's more to me most concerning is those linebackers in front of them. And I actually think, and everyone talks about, obviously you'd love to have Aiden Hutchinson, and they traded for Zadarius Smith, and I think the defensive line is holding its own enough, especially with DJ Reader still on the inside there. I don't really know what the answers are at linebacker at this point. Jack Campbell is playing passable football, but he hasn't really emerged as that, 18th overall pick, kind of top 10 linebacker that they've hoped for. We've seen flashes of it. If he were to play every week like he played in the Packers game a couple weeks ago, we'd be having a whole different conversation here. But the fact that they lost Alex Anzalone, they lost Malcolm Rodriguez, there's just too many injuries at linebacker. They're shuffling guys who are basically special teamers and practice squad guys in there. 39.6 overall grade as a unit in this game, their linebackers. 29.5 coverage grade. And it's really caved in the last few weeks. And again, I have the same concern with the Lions as I do, say, with the Buffalo Bills, where where the Bills need a Matt Milano to play at a special level at some point here to make a deep run. I think Jack Campbell's going to have to, at some point here, he has to emerge as that guy, and we're running out of time to see that as far as this season. You got next week against Minnesota, who's a real tough opponent for any linebacker, and then you have all these teams in the playoffs, especially that stress the middle of the field, right? When you talk about the Rams and the Bucks and the Vikings and all these teams they have to play, I worry about this because it feels like when I was watching last night, I was expecting, loosely after the game last night, before we got to look at the grades, I was going to be, okay, what's the Lions' defense? Of course, it's either going to be the whole thing or there's going to be something about it or everybody except Kirby Joseph. And the more I watch them, most of the chunk plays, most of the explosive plays that they give up are because of their linebackers not being where they need to be, I should say. And I think when it comes to the run game just being a step slow because they have backups playing. When you talk about defending play action, they step up so hard on play action. I think about Kirby Joseph's second interception. If he doesn't drive on that football, on that in cut, the way he did and pick that ball off, the Niners might score because every Lions linebacker was on the line of scrimmage with that play action fake, right? The same exact way the Lions offense does it to everybody else. That's what the Niners did, is you just go straight play action, you run that in cut right behind the linebackers, and it works every time. It just so happened that Kirby Joseph made an all-pro play on it. But I think it's going to be the importance of this unit. I think this is going to decide where their defense is, if they can even play at a decent level. Because next week, look, you're playing Minnesota, an extremely hard offense for linebackers to defend against. If you lose that game, pretty good chance you're going to Tampa. And I highlighted on our show yesterday that linebackers have the lowest defensive grade in the league against the Bucs offense because of Liam Cohen, because of Baker Mayfield, Bucky Irving, everything going on, Jalen McMillan, Cade Otton flying around on that second level. You do not want – I think this game in Week 18 is going to be more important for the Lions than it is for Minnesota. I actually have more confidence right now that Minnesota could go to Tampa or go to L.A. and win on the road than I do the Lions, especially in those matchups where Sean McVay and all the motions and everything in his offense stresses linebackers like all hell. And again, in the Bucs, I went over the whole thing yesterday about they are the last team you want to play right now with subpar linebackers, especially in Tampa. It's going to be rowdy. The Bucs already beat them once this year when the Lions were healthy and had Hutchinson and had everything going, right? I think the Bucs right now would be just as bad a matchup as Minnesota is going to be this week. And the Lions, they really need to figure out, because I'd be extremely worried if they had to go down to Tampa the way that offense is rolling right now. These linebackers, I don't know how they're going to find it other than Jack Campbell just flipping some sort of switch or finding the super soldier serum or what, because that's what they're going to need. He's the last man standing at this point. Otherwise, the guys next to him, you're talking about, what is it, Ezekiel Turner and Jalen Reeves-Maybin and guys who are generally special teams players. They're just not getting it done. We saw it in the Bills game when they gave up 40+, and in this game, it just felt like every time the Niners had a big play, it was the linebacker. It was somewhere a linebacker was biting too hard on a flat route, biting too hard on play action, not getting to their gap in the run game. There's just too many plays where I think that is the main issue. I think the secondary can hold up with the two safeties, like you mentioned. Amik Robertson had a good game, right? Terrion Arnold, he's been battling. I'll be honest, it hasn't been a great rookie year, but he's been battling. I think they can survive in the secondary. I think they can survive enough on the D-line. I'm looking at if their linebackers can survive, and I think Jack Campbell's a guy that really needs to flip a switch and play well in the playoffs here.
They might be getting some cavalry back with Alex Anzalone. Certainly getting that extra week, getting the number 1 seed is going to mean a lot to that. So I know that Dan Campbell said that he was close, that he was real close, and maybe that means even week 18, but if not, certainly seems like he could come back for the postseason, because that's going to be a big deal. There's no doubt about it. And we'll dig into that in a second. My most disappointing is Jake Moody, the kicker for the San Francisco 49ers. Stop drafting kickers before day 3. Stop. Just stop doing it. Like there's no reason to do it. I understand everybody believes that they're about to draft the kicker that they don't have to worry about for the next 10 years. It rarely happens. It so rarely happens. It is not worth the risk when you have a second round pick, a third round pick, whatever it is. Jake Moody was drafted in the 3rd round for the San Francisco 49ers in 2023. Missed another 2 field goals for a 51-yarder, a 58-yarder last night, missed an extra point. He's now 23 for 32 on the season. And you're basically having these conversations where, Kyle Shanahan has expressed his confidence in Jake Moody before, and now you get, I think it was last night, he was asked a question of, evaluating the kicker position. He's like, yeah, we're evaluating every position. And so it's like, man, within the span of 2 years of when you drafted this guy, you've gone from taking him in the 3rd round to, we probably have to come up with another kicker. It is so much less of a physical game, and it is so much more of a mental game, kicking, that it is so impossible to correlate college success to the NFL in the margin that you would need it to show to draft one in the 3rd round. I go back to the Buccaneers drafting Roberto Aguayo in the 2nd round. Roberto Aguayo never missed in college, whether it was a meaningless game or whether the national championship was on the line. This dude never missed. And Tampa thought that they were drafting a kicker that would end his career with maybe the all-time points record in the NFL, because to have out ice in his veins this guy was in college. Flamed out immediately. Jake Moody, I'm not saying that this is it for him. I'm not trying to put that on the guy, but you're already questioning whether or not you're cutting a 3rd round pick at kicker 2 years into his career. Just don't do it. There's too many guys that can kick. Just don't do it. Don't draft a kicker before day 3. That's my most disappointing there. Jake Moody, and then that's my kicker take. You have a kicker take before we move on?
I just like there what you said about the mental side, and I think the big thing, I think if you take a kicker in the first 4 rounds, it's usually considered overvalued, and I think what it does mentally for those guys is add that pressure of, like Aguayo, I'm a 2nd round pick, and this is all expected of me, or Moody, I'm a 3rd round pick on a Super Bowl contending team, and I could be the difference in us winning or losing a Super Bowl. I think that does play into it for that position when you talk about not that many guys are drafted that high. It's still amazing the Raiders took Sebastian Janikowski in the 1st round way back in the day, and that one worked, of course. But even so, it just adds to an already mentally straining position at an NFL level where so many games are played within a field goal. To take a guy that high and add that pressure to it might as well be like he was taken in the 1st round, because so few of them are taken that early, and they're really not supposed to be taken that early considering how few snaps they play and how high pressure it is. So I'm glad you brought up that point where it's really because of the mental game and what you're adding to such a young guy, on his mind.
Yep. Couple of closing points before we get out of here. But first, I want to ask you a question. What's your child's future success look like to you? Is it a job that they're passionate about? Maybe traveling the world, just being happy and comfortable? Whatever their journey is, you can help make it easier to achieve that with a kid's investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life. By making a contribution to your child's future today, you can help give them the means to pursue their dreams, both big and small, whatever they are. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With the kids' investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Kids can't invest when they're minors, but this kid's investment account can allow you to invest on their behalf, giving their investments even more time to grow. Whole thing's online. It takes as little as 5 minutes to set up, and then you just manage the account right from your phone, monitoring their investments right there. The funds, they can be used for anything. Like I said, when they're kids, maybe it's tuition, it's summer camps, it's music lessons, it's things like that. Or when they're young adults, starting their first business, buying their first home, buying their first car, whatever it is. It's all right there for you. It has a ton of different benefits. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child's future today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, MEET, fabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios are managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. I don't know if there's been a bigger regular season game than what the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings are going to play next week. I can't remember one in a long time. Maybe I just have bad short-term memory, but a little bit of what you were talking about earlier in the episode. The winner of this game gets a bye week and home field advantage throughout the playoffs. The loser is on the road in the wild card round and then likely on the road throughout their entire journey of the playoffs. I mean, it could not be higher stakes here with Minnesota and Detroit matching up in Sunday Night Football next week. I can't wait for it. It's going to be incredible. We're going to get the absolute best of whatever both of these teams are because it means so much. You mentioned how much it's going to be tough for the Lions if they end up having to go down to Tampa. And, Tampa's defense, we're not totally like previewing that game, but Tampa's defense has really struggled. And so even if Tampa's offense is great, like this game's probably going to be 40-44 or something like that. And we'll see who ends up coming out on top. But it's just, I cannot remember a regular season game with this much magnitude, Dalton. It just feels like not only do these two teams not like each other, not only do they understand that they're standing in each other's way, but what you get if you win this game. You don't win the Super Bowl, but man, it gets a whole lot easier if that's the case. And for the Lions specifically, I just talked about getting some reinforcements back at linebacker, getting a little bit more healthy. Obviously, every team in the NFL wants a bye week at this point in time of the season after a long regular season. But for the Lions specifically, not having to play in the wild card round, giving their entire team and some of those guys who are on short-term IR a little bit more time to heal up, that could mean everything for a potential Super Bowl run for them. So it's huge for everybody, but the stakes could not be higher for these two teams that are facing off on Sunday Night Football.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the rest factor too, about these teams. It's been such a long season. You got to remember, these two teams, their bye weeks. The Lions were in week 5 and Minnesota was in week 6. They have played a ton of games in a row, a ton of high-pressure games in a row, and this is going to be another one. So that week of rest, I think, is definitely first and foremost going to benefit whichever team wins. The home field, look, these two teams have spectacular home field advantages. Detroit, those fans are nuts. And in Minnesota, I think it's one that we kind of forget about. Sometimes we talk about Philly and Lambeau and Detroit right now, but Minnesota's got a fantastic home field advantage too. It is loud in that place. So I think that's a bit that plays into it. And then I think, look, the NFC, this playoff field is deep. It's very deep. And I think if we're assuming the Bucs are going to beat the Saints this week, which you never completely assume, we've seen things happen even as recent as this weekend, but you're going to have to play going on the road as the 5, either the Bucs or the Rams or maybe Atlanta if they get the miracle that they need. But let's just say it's the Bucs or the Rams. Look, we've already seen the Rams beat the Vikings and they played the Lions to overtime. The Bucs beat the Lions. I don't think they played Minnesota, but they're as dangerous as any offense in the league right now. these are not two road environments that you want to go in. I think like I mentioned with the Lions, especially playing Tampa and they're banged up at linebacker, the Lions, if the sooner they can get Alex Anzalone back, that's a help. At least he's a starting caliber player. But as far as the stakes go, I think the biggest thing is we've never seen a game with such. Now, every year it seems like there's usually a game where, okay, one team wins a division title or playoff spot and they're playing a win-in scenario. Okay, but this is one where we know both teams are in the playoffs. They have the two best records in the NFC. We usually see this game like the Bills and Chiefs earlier in week 9 or whatever, or week 10. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, this is consequential and we'll see how it shakes out. It'll probably affect it later. No, this is right now. This affects it next week. Whichever team loses is going to have to recover after what's likely to be a brutal game and go to Tampa or LA and play a super tough team headed by a raging hot offense. The Rams, not so much lately, but we already know what Stafford and Nakua and Kupp can do, especially in the clutch, right? So I think your road gets easier. The rest is big. The home field cannot be overstated, I should say, for these two teams, especially the fact that whichever one of them gets it is going to get it over Philadelphia, who we're assuming is the next biggest threat to a Super Bowl run here in the NFC,
yep.
Right? So there are so many factors, there's so many things to think about. And then I think the question is, too, for the team that has to go to Tampa or LA in that first round, look, we're about to see an all-out war in this game, right? These two teams are going to lay everything on the line to win this game, everything they have left in the tank. And I think, teams do this against the Lions, and all year, isn't there some record where it's like the team, the week after a team plays Detroit, they've lost like every game this season or something close to it?
I actually don't know. I haven't seen that stat, but I believe it because it takes a lot to beat Detroit.
There is something floating out there that like either every team or almost every team that plays the Lions, they lose the next week. It's the majority of them because it takes so much to beat them, and they play such a physical brand of football, especially on the offensive side, that it's tough. It's really tough. So I think this game comes down to whichever team can defend can cover the middle of the field better, because in the first game, both of them just teed off on each other over the middle. Goff was spectacular throwing down the middle, and the Lions, we've been mentioning their defense and the struggles at linebacker. And then I think it's going to come down to situational football. This game, you're going to see the last 5 minutes, whether it's a mistake from either of the quarterbacks, whether it's a last-second field goal. Keep in mind the Vikings are working with a rookie kicker. Actually, both are working with rookie kickers, and Will Reichard and Jake Bates each side. So could come down to a rookie kicker making the biggest kick of his life. Or, I think the other one, too, as always, is what is Brian Flores bringing? What's it going to be this week? Because it's always something different. What's the adjustment from the first time around? It's one of the best football games we're going to watch all season, and the consequences, you're right. In the immediate sense of this is what's happening next week as far as the consequences, I don't know that we've seen anything like it.
Look at Dalton giving you a little match that matters, a little plus factor here, a little mini preview for this game. I love it. I cannot wait to dig into this game and so many other important games in the preview on Thursday with Carmen Vitale. Make sure you guys are tuning in for that here on the PFF YouTube channel. Appreciate everybody watching and listening to this little Monday night recap here. This is a lot of fun to watch this game and get to do a little one-off video of a game that held a lot of magnitude, means a lot now, setting up an incredible Week 18. Make sure you come back on Thursday as we preview every single game in the final week of the regular season. I'm Trevor Sikkema for Dalton Wasserman, saying thank you so much for watching. See you guys then.